Hello and welcome back to Recapped Movie. Today I'm going to talk about a sci-fi comedy movie from French called Two Worlds. The story is about Remy, a simple and passive Frenchman with a beautiful wife and two kids. He works as an art restaurateur, but recently he keeps bumping into strange things. His body would involuntarily sink into all kinds of furniture, chairs, sofa, even his own bed. He also doubts whether it was his own delusion until one time his studio was flooded by water. When he tried to save all the oil paintings, he was suddenly dragged into the water by a mysterious power. When he came out from the water, he found himself in the center of a lake in the wild, catching his breath. Remy looked around in confusion and walked towards the shore. Suddenly he saw a few tribesmen with strange clothes running towards him. He was so scared and tried to run away, but fell into the water again. Luckily he was pulled out of the water by his co-worker from the other world who thought he accidentally fell into the water and almost drowned himself. He tried to convince himself it was all delusion, but the experience was just too real. When he got home, he told his wife Lucille about his strange experience. But Lucille didn't seem very interested and looked pretty anxious. After struggling for a while, Lucille told him that she fell in love with her colleague Anton and wanted a divorce. Then she even brought his love rival to their home and introduced him to Remy. After a delightful conversation, Remy swallowed the insult and accepted the fact. He even promised that he would move out soon so that they could live together. Now Remy became the poorest man in the world who lost his career and family in just one day. His family got together trying to comfort him and cheer him up, but since he is such a silent and passive man, soon all people forgot about him. His cousin showed up and stole everyone's attention. Remy felt bored and left the table, went to the kitchen to pour himself a cup of coffee. Unexpectedly, strange things happened again. The family cat tried jumping to the fridge and suddenly stopped moving in midair. Noticing this, Remy examined the cat, curiously, flipping it around in the air. Didn't realize time was stopped. He asked his family to come and see this, but didn't hear any response. The lights in the kitchen started to blink and Remy began to sink into the floor. He desperately called for help, but no one noticed him. As he continued to scream for help, he was pulled to the other world. Remy found himself in the middle of a strange forest. After a while he found a group of people butchering an animal and approached them to ask some questions. A tall and scary-looking man talks to Remy, but he can't understand him. The group then decided to feed Remy to their master. Noticing that something wasn't right, Remy ran for his life screaming. After a long chase, he ended up entering a dark cave. Remy explored the cave to look for help. After a while, he encountered a creature that bit his neck and was forced to run again. While running, he was suddenly pulled back to his parents' house in the modern world. Noticing the commotion in the kitchen, Remy's family decided to check on him. They found him battered and surrounded by rubble. He tried to explain what happened, but he got scolded for the broken French press instead. A few awkward conversations later, Remy fainted. Remy was taken to a hospital and examined by a doctor for his injuries. He tried to explain what happened to the doctor, but she told him to meet a shrink instead. The next day when Remy was in his studio, surrounded by his landlord, insurance guy, bank guy, and clients, he started sinking into the floor again. He then emerged from a basket in the other world and was greeted with cheers from the tribesmen. Remy tried to communicate with the tribesmen, but they failed to understand each other. Moments later, they forced him to eat a berry. The berry then helped him understand their language. And finally he found out the reason he was pulled into this world again and again. It turns out in this world, the tribesmen were ruled by a cannibal called Tyrant Zoltan. He not only enslaves them, but also eats people when he feels hungry. Everyone is afraid of him, so the elders and mages deciphered the artifact from their ancestors, which says, there will be a savior coming from another world. He will help them kill Zoltan and liberate everyone from slavery. So the elders and mages used the method from the artifact to call their savior from time to time. Upon hearing this, Remy finally understood the strange things that happened to him. They showed him the village of Sotan's men and asked him to destroy it. He refused and told them he was just an ordinary man, not their savior. They decided to hang Remy on top of the tower and threatened to drop him. This act forced him to agree and become their savior. This way, Remy was led to an isolated room and left to plan the destruction of Zotan. He sat in front of a table filled with food and tried figuring out what to do. He then grabbed the watermelon in front of him and in a flash, was back in his studio. Later that day, Remy went to the library to learn more about the other world. After some Google searches, nothing came up. He then decided to move on and look for books about self-defense instead. When he returned to the other world, he was given a sword by the tribesmen. They asked for help to leave the settlement and he agreed. At the settlement's borders, Remy asked why they never tried leaving. They told him that if they crossed the borders, they would be struck by lightning. Realizing that it was just superstition, Remy told them to cross the borders. He crossed the border first to show them nothing terrible would happen. After that, the entire tribe followed him to leave the settlement to find a new place to call home. Remy and the tribesmen traveled. Eventually they met two of Zoltan's men in a forest. The men told them to go back, but Remy fought them with his suave fencing skills. He killed one of Zoltan's men and forced the other one to to retreat. Before leaving, Zoltan's soldier warned him that war was coming. He then confronted the tribesmen about not helping him with the fight. They explained that it was all according to the prophecy. Shortly after, the tribesmen started dragging the soldier's corpse. Remy asked what they were going to do with it. He then learned that they planned on eating it as part of their tradition. Surprised, Remy ordered them to stop and forbade cannibalism starting that day. Moments later, people came running and confirmed that war was truly coming. Back in his world, Remy revisited the library for books about waging war and governance. He studied the books to prepare procedures for the coming war against Zoltan's army. When he returned to the other world, he gave a speech and prepared the tribesmen to fight. That night, Remy decided to have fun with Kara and other women in the tribe. He asked Bali to bring women to his tent. While surrounded by beautiful women, Remy realized that he still loved Lucille. In an unbelievable turn of events, he gave up on the fun and talked about his life. Instead, the entire thing turned into a marriage counseling session. Shortly after, he heard his son calling and returned to his world. After a heartfelt talk with his son, he waited to return to the other world. The next moment, Remy appeared in the middle of a war with only his sleepwear. He joined Bali and Reem Jeel, then ordered his army to move towards higher grounds and retreat. They regrouped and prepared for a counterattack against the enemy. The next morning, Remy stands in front of the Zonians, waking them up by throwing insults and rocks at them. He then approached the encampment and started slapping the living hell out of the sleeping soldiers. Next thing you know, Remy is now running for his life and is chased by the entire Zoltanian army. It was all part of Remy's plan, though. He led the Zoltanians to an open field, signaled his army to begin their attack, and hid inside a huge tree trunk. Once Remy's army appeared, they had bows and used them to fire a rain of arrows down on the Zoltanans. The two armies continued to fight. Surprisingly, the Zoltanians were defeated and forced to retreat. Remy emerged from the tree trunk and celebrated the victory with his people. After that, they moved to a new land and began constructing Remy's kingdom. Time passed and the new kingdom flourished under a bearded Remy's guidance. He couldn't imagine an ordinary man like him could be worshipped like this. He feels that his potential has been unleashed. When he felt tired of guiding the country, he would spend some leisure time with his favorite concubines. He even painted a Mona Lisa-inspired portrait for one of them. When he encountered problems during his rule of his kingdom, he would travel back to the modern world to search for solutions. After being king in his world for almost half a year, when he came back to his real life and faced his ex-wife and her boyfriend, he was no longer that weak and passive man he was before. When Antoine implied Remy to leave the house so he could enjoy time with Lucille, Remy got angry and beat him up. Satisfied with the scared Antoine, he leaves him with Lucille. On the way to his studio, Remy was almost hit by a car. The driver got out to confront him, but he intimidated the guy to submission. A few people were waiting for him to discuss his financial problems in front of his studio. He told them that he was changing jobs and simply left. He looked for a new job and started working as a flyer distributor for an Indian restaurant. Unhappy with the job, Remy threw the flyers and left. While walking, the world stopped, and as soon as he noticed this, Remy was happy. He dived into the road and emerged back in the other world. Shortly after, he found Kara, his new lover, waiting for him. He asked her if anything had happened while he was away. After learning that all was well, he decided to have some fun with her. As Remy's greed grew, he started to enslave his citizens to build more fancy palaces for him. One day, Remy met with his citizens to discuss problems in his kingdom. He rushed to address them as he sat on a grandiose rotating chair. He was then notified that some citizens were revolting because they were overworked. He rushed to meet the rebels, but failed to convince them to resume their work. They felt that being Zoltan's slaves was even better than being overworked like this. The revolt eventually got out of hand, and Remy was forced to escape the mob. After being cornered, he decided to give up on his kingdom and return to his world. He visited his friend Serge and asked to borrow a studio so he could start working again. As time went by, he built relationships with one of his clients, Delphine. Later that night, at the key moment when Remy was kissed by Delphine, he was summoned back to the cave in the other world, where he found Rakiel wounded. He was then forced to fight and kill Zoltan to fulfill the prophecy. Zoltan found Remy shortly after and confronted him. During the fight, Remy picked up a spear and threw it. The spear stabbed Zoltan's chest. The creature then fled outside the cave to die in front of the tribesmen. Remy followed him outside, feeling triumphant. In an unexpected turn of events, Remy learned the last part about the prophecy, which was for his people to eat him so they could have his strength and wisdom. Wanting no part of that, he quickly ran away from his people. But the elders threw the artifact into the fire pit, so Remy would stay in this world forever. After a long chase, Remy was captured because of his own carelessness. As he was about to get eaten, Kara reached for the artifact in the fire pit and threw it into the river. Remy was saved and returned to the modern world. He woke up in a hospital, happy to escape being eaten. Later he found his loved ones waiting for him in the hospital hallway. He told them he was fine and walked towards Delphine and Lucille. He tried introducing them, but they already got to know each other while Remy was unconscious. Delphine left shortly after and Remy was left alone with Lucille. Outside, Lucille told Remy that she kicked Antoine out of her life and asked him to come back. Remy expressed his hurt feelings and refused her request. He then called a taxi and left her. 47 days later, Remy walked on a beach in Barcelona. He met up with his children and Lucille. He sat down with Lucille and happily restored their relationship. Meanwhile, the people in Remy's kingdom are gathered as a statue of him was erected in his honor. The film ends with Remy watching the news on TV. It was about the discovery of an early painting of the Mona Lisa. Remy was smiling when he saw the painting up close. It turns out that it was the painting Remy made for Kara in the other world. But archaeologists told people that they had just found an early work by Da Vinci, and according to the style, they are pretty sure it was painted by Da Vinci when he was 5. Thanks for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, consider liking the video and subscribing to our channel. It helps us a lot.